Welcome back to React Juice TV. Let's get it.
Here we go.
At the end of October 2009, Cleveland police raided the house at 12205 Imperial Avenue after receiving a report about a strange, foul odor. When the door opened, they never expected to step into a real graveyard with dozens of dead bodies.
Oh, wow.
The corpses were stuffed into plastic bags, hidden under the floor.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Here we go again.
And even right next to the homeowner's bed. A man who seemed ordinary but was, in fact, a cold-blooded serial killer.
He looked like
the most terrifying thing wasn't the number of victims, but the way he killed right in the middle of a crowded residential area without anyone knowing. This was considered one of the most horrifying serial murder cases in Ohio's history. Join us as we explore Anthony Sowell's House of Horrors. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our latest videos. Cleveland, Ohio, 2009. A gloomy autumn afternoon, the sky heavy with dark gray clouds, signaling an impending downpour over Mount Pleasant. This wasn't a luxurious or glamorous place. Old buildings, alleys filled with trash, run-down apartment complexes, all painting a bleak picture of a neighborhood abandoned by society. But the worst thing wasn't poverty or rampant crime. It was a mysterious, putrid smell that had haunted residents for months.
Can you smell it?
At first, people thought the stench came from a nearby garbage dump or a dead animal trapped in the sewer system. But as time passed, the smell grew stronger, spreading to the point where those living nearby couldn't stand it anymore. People shut their windows, lit scented candles, sprayed perfume, but nothing could mask that terrifying odor
that
of
dead
death.
body smell.
Then one day, the stench was no longer the only thing that terrified the residents.
And it's
While everyone
undeniable.
was still debating the source of the unbearable smell, at least 11 women in Cleveland had mysteriously disappeared. They were all black and impoverished, most of them either homeless or living alone, many with a history of alcohol and drug abuse. People like them vanished every day. No one searched for them. No one remembered them. That's why local police paid little attention when they were reported missing. But on the afternoon of October 29, 2009, everything changed. That afternoon, Cleveland police received an emergency call. A woman, in a state of panic, ran into the police station with bruises on her neck and a horrifying story. She said she had just escaped from the house at 1205, where a man had held her captive and tried to kill her.
The one that got away.
And the strange man living inside that house was none other than Anthony Sowell. On the corner of Imperial Avenue, 12205 stood silently among a row of dilapidated houses. There was nothing special about it. A two-story house with peeling paint, windows tightly covered by curtains, and a front yard littered with piles of trash. To the neighbors, the homeowner led an eerily secretive life. Day or night, the house was almost always shut tight. Every night, the surrounding neighbors often heard strange noises, screams, thuds, but then everything would go silent, as if nothing had ever happened. No one knew exactly what Anthony Sowell was doing in there.
I didn't know this was going to be
Everyone
animated,
felt
by the
something
way.
was off, but no one
Like
did
I
anything. In Mount Pleasant, people learned to mind their own business, so they chose to ignore the
I don't
disturbing
pre-watch my
signs
videos.
surrounding Sowell's house.
Real reactions.
Only when blaring sirens and a fleet of police cars arrived at his doorstep did the residents realize that all their suspicions were true. After receiving the distress call, police immediately headed to the house on Imperial Avenue. When they arrived, the door was still shut, just like always, but this time, they had a search warrant. A young officer, just 3 years into the force, was the first to step inside. The moment the door opened, he immediately recoiled, vomiting right on the doorstep.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
The stench coming from inside was unlike anything he had ever smelled before, a horrifying blend of decomposing bodies, filth, and dried blood. No one could have prepared for what they were about to uncover inside Anthony Sowell's house. The police had no idea they were about to walk into one of the most gruesome cases in Cleveland's history. Inside the house, darkness engulfed everything. The hallway lights no longer worked, with only faint slivers of light seeping in through the tightly covered windows. The living room was a chaotic mess: trash, beer cans, cigarette butts, and old clothes strewn everywhere. But nothing was more horrifying than the thick, suffocating smell of death in the air, a pungent stench of decayed flesh and dried
would have
blood.
threw up too.
The officers split up to search. One stepped into the kitchen, where black plastic bags were tied shut, bulging as if they contained something unspeakable. Another officer opened the door leading to the basement, and immediately, a swarm of thick, black flies burst out, carrying with them an unbearable stench that made the man double over, coughing violently. But that wasn't the worst thing the officers would face. When they entered the bedroom, a horrifying sight awaited them. On the floor lay a decomposing female body, her skin darkened, covered in swarming
Sad,
flies.
man. People
Her
are
eyes
just
were wide open,
demonic.
as if death had come so suddenly that she hadn't even had time to close them.
Wow.
A scream rang out as another officer discovered two more bodies. One was stuffed beneath an old mattress, while the other lay in the corner of the room, tightly wrapped in a plastic bag.
You would have to animate
All three
this
bodies
story,
were
and
in
it's
an
true.
advanced state of
Couldn't show any of
decomposition,
this.
their stench overwhelming.
And on YouTube.
This was no longer just a crime scene. It was a true graveyard. As soon as the police called for backup, an officer walking past the stairs accidentally kicked something soft. When he looked down, his face turned pale. It was a human arm, stripped down to the bone, the victim dismembered by someone. But even more horrifying secrets were hidden inside this house. The forensic team was called in, bringing high-powered flashlights. When they shone their lights down the basement stairs, the sight that appeared made everyone shudder. Stacks of black garbage bags were piled on top of one another, some gnawed open by rats, revealing patches of pale, decayed flesh inside. The police slowly opened one of the bags to investigate, and immediately, the overwhelming stench forced the entire team to step back. Inside was a victim's severed head, eyes wide open, hair matted with decomposition fluids, crawling with maggots.
I'm out of here.
As they continued searching, the police uncovered even more horrifying evidence. In the basement, they found a long iron chain, seemingly used to restrain victims against the wall. When the forensic team entered Sowell's bedroom, they had no idea they were about to step into one of the most terrifying rooms of all. The mattress was stained with dried blood, evidence of repeated killings. Under the bed, they found a human skeleton wrapped in a plastic bag, with rotting flesh still clinging to the bones. He had been sleeping on the very bed where he killed his victims. He lived among decomposing bodies, in a stench so unbearable that no one else could have tolerated it. A plastic container under the bed held various pieces of jewelry and wallets, later identified as belongings of the missing women. Finally, when police dug up the backyard, they discovered two shallow graves, each containing a different body. Some victims had been buried alive. During the house search, officers found old videotapes, which contained documentary
How can somebody do this to somebody else, let alone this
Sowell
many
didn't
people?
just kill. He studied, learned, and relished becoming a monster. Criminal psychologists began profiling Anthony Sowell and realized he didn't kill impulsively. He planned, carefully selected his victims, and turned his house into a living prison. The investigation wasn't over.
I ain't trying to be
but one
racist,
thing
but you
was
don't see
clear.
too many black
Anthony
people
Sowell
doing
was a
this.
serial killer.
Go look up the history. Shit, don't everybody believe in Google?
Go Google that shit. See what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, man.
That's
And
crazy.
this house was a true hell on earth. According to police records, Anthony Sowell had served 6 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, spending time in California, the Carolinas, and Japan. He moved into the white, 3-story house
Must have had
at
some mental health issues.
12205
Well, obviously did,
Imperial
but
Avenue in 2005.
some residuals
It
from
was
the
a poor
military.
neighborhood on Cleveland's east side, where
PTSD or
well-kept
something.
working class homes stood alongside abandoned houses and shuttered businesses. The house had once belonged to his father, who had passed away, and Sowell had bought it for a low price. Before moving there, he had served a 15-year prison sentence for rape. In 1989, prosecutors stated that Sowell lured a woman to his former residence on Page Avenue, threatened to kill her, and sexually assaulted her. After being released from prison in 2005, Sowell worked at a factory but was laid off in 2007. When his unemployment benefits ran out, he started selling scrap metal. He had once been married and had a daughter, but after his release, he never attempted to reconnect with his ex-wife or child. Instead, he sought partners through an adult website. He created his account immediately after leaving prison in 2005, describing himself as 5 feet 10 inches, 160 pounds, with a distinctive scar on his face. On his profile, he claimed to be a master looking for a submissive, portraying himself as outgoing and party-loving.
I lied.
From there, the butcher began his hunt. One night in December 2008, a woman ran into the middle of Kinsman Road and 116th Street, waving frantically for help, her body covered in blood. The woman was Gladys Wade, 41 at the time. She frantically told police that Anthony Sowell had invited her in for a beer when she was passing by on her way to a local convenience store. When she refused, Sowell attacked her, dragged her upstairs, and strangled her until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, her clothes had been removed, and Sowell was still choking her, attempting to assault her.
Yeah.
Wade managed to escape,
Woke up
running
being
into a
choked.
nearby
That's
restaurant,
crazy.
begging people to call 911. But instead of helping, they told her to go outside and use a payphone.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Wow.
Sowell chased after her,
People so
angrily
wicked.
telling neighbors that she had tried to break into his house to steal. Then he calmly walked back inside. Wade finally found a police patrol car and pleaded for help. Officers called an ambulance and took her to the hospital. After receiving medical treatment, Wade gave a full statement to the police, but they dismissed it as a he said, she said situation.
Come on now, dog. Come on, man.
But she's a
Officers
black
claimed
woman.
there was no clear evidence and even suggested
That's why
that
you go
Wade might have been
investigate.
the attacker instead.
Why that burns me up.
Police later went to check Sowell's house on Imperial Avenue at the corner of 123rd Street. Snow tracks around the entrance indicated a struggle. A blood-stained tissue was discarded nearby, and the steps leading to the house were smeared with blood. At that point, they briefly detained Sowell for questioning. 2 days later, police released Sowell without searching his house, and at least 5 more women disappeared before his arrest in
That's
2009.
crazy.
Wade's case became a missed opportunity, haunting the community and law enforcement for years to come.
As it
For a
should.
long time,
They
he
trash.
lured vulnerable women with sweet talk, sometimes with alcohol or drugs. Some victims who escaped reported him to the police, but no one took action. Others, less fortunate, never left that house alive. A day after the police raided the killer's house, authorities in the U.S. discovered 4 more bodies and a skull inside and around his Cleveland residence, bringing the total number of victims to 11. A serious issue emerged. Anthony Sowell was not at the scene when police searched his house. The killer had vanished without a trace. An urgent manhunt was launched. Anthony Sowell's name appeared on every news channel, and his image flooded the city. But Sowell was no ordinary fugitive. He had military training, knew how to hide, and knew how to evade capture. For the next 3 days, he became the most wanted man in America. Cleveland was gripped with fear. Everyone knew a monster was lurking somewhere in the city. People locked their doors, and women were afraid to go out
should be locked
alone.
anyway.
Until October 31, 2009, when a bar employee spotted Sowell wandering near downtown and immediately called the police. 15 minutes
Good
later,
job.
a SWAT team moved in and arrested the killer on the street. When caught, Sowell remained eerily calm. He denied being the man authorities were searching for. But when law enforcement began fingerprinting him, he finally admitted his identity. Sowell was officially confirmed as the man behind the gruesome murders.
Gentlemen, excuse me 1 second.
Cleveland had never witnessed a case as horrifying as this.
I'm gonna have to look this case
News
up. I've never heard of it.
12205. Imperial Avenue spread like wildfire, shaking the entire city. But as police
I wonder
began
about
releasing
that
the
house
victims'
later
names,
on
the
and
bitter
don't know
truth
about it.
emerged.
Who are you people?
Most of them were women whom society had forgotten. Tonya Carmichael, 52, had been missing since 2008. Her mother reported her disappearance, but no one really paid attention.
Wow.
Are you sure your
She's
daughter
a
didn't
woman
just
of
go
color, I'm
somewhere or
sure.
come back? An officer asked. Michelle Mason, 45, was an intelligent woman who had attended college but fell into addiction.
Hey, does this Coke smell funny?
When she disappeared, no one reported it because they assumed she's just wandering off again. The list went on, but the common thread among them
Always
was clear.
assuming.
They were the most easily overlooked members of society: Black women, the homeless, and those with histories of addiction. After the case became public,
Like they're
public
subhuman.
outrage erupted. Cleveland police faced harsh criticism for ignoring warnings for years. The victims' families began filing lawsuits against the city, raising troubling questions. Why didn't the police investigate the reports from women who had escaped? Why didn't they check the house sooner, despite neighbors constantly reporting the foul stench? How many other cases had been ignored simply because the victims were Black, homeless, or struggling with addiction?
Sad, man. Super sad.
Outside the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, a crowd gathered from early morning, holding pictures of the victims, signs demanding justice, and tears of anguish. Anthony Sowell, known as the Imperial Avenue Strangler, entered the courtroom wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, his hands tightly cuffed. He showed no fear, no remorse. His unnerving calmness sent chills through the room. His eyes scanned the crowd as if he were still in control. The judge, lawyers, victims' families, and media, all eyes were on him. The prosecutor opened with a sharp and chilling statement. Images from 12205, Imperial Avenue, were displayed on a large screen. The courtroom air became thick with tension. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Sobs echoed throughout the room, not just for the victims, but for an entire city that had failed to protect its most vulnerable citizens. When it was Anthony Sowell's turn to speak,
back doing
the
it
room
this
fell
day.
silent.
I'm sure.
He did not tremble, did not apologize. He even smirked when asked about his crimes. Sowell tilted his head, paused for a moment, then shrugged.
Show
What's
the
done is
real
done.
dude again.
Regret won't change anything. The courtroom erupted in fury. Some family members broke down in tears, while others were so enraged they wanted to lunge at him. His blatant indifference only fueled the city's collective outrage. After weeks of trial, the jury reached a verdict. Anthony Sowell was convicted on 82 counts, including murder, kidnapping, and abuse of corpses. The judge announced the death sentence. The courtroom burst into emotion.
If I'm going down, I'm taking a whole lot of people with me.
Order in the court! Order in the court!
Some families embraced, crying because justice had finally been served. But for many, justice had come too late. Sowell never faced execution. He spent years in prison, continuously filing appeals to delay his death. But on February 8, 2021, Anthony Sowell died in prison from cancer. There was no
that
public
was
execution, no
too
final
good for him.
moment for the
I will see you in hell!
victims' families to see
And
him
he got the
punished.
last laugh.
He passed away quietly, without suffering, completely unlike the pain he inflicted on his victims. Some felt it was unfair. Others believed his death was insignificant compared to the lessons this case left behind. A month after
It's all in the
case,
Lord's hands, though.
12205, Imperial Avenue was demolished.
You'll be judged
People
accordingly.
said it was the only way to erase the lingering horrors of that
Oh,
place.
okay. I'm about to say.
In the winter of 2011, a massive bulldozer rolled into Mount Pleasant, heading for 12205 Imperial Avenue. Outside, a silent crowd gathered, neighbors, victims' families, and even strangers who had followed the case from the beginning. It wasn't just a building being torn down. It was the destruction of a monument to pure evil. The Anthony Sowell case ended with a death sentence for the killer, but those who followed the story knew that some mysteries would never be solved. How many people had he really killed?
Exactly.
Were their bodies still
That they don't know
undiscovered?
about.
What had those women endured in their final moments? Some experts believed the 11 known victims were just the tip of the iceberg. How many more had Sowell murdered without anyone knowing? How many people had gone missing in Cleveland without anyone caring? And most importantly, if the police had investigated sooner, how many lives could have been saved?
Well, thank y'all for tuning in again to another episode on React Juice TV, man. I'll see y'all next time.
In the name of all that is good and decent, no more for today!